We went to bed in 2017. And woke up, and it was 1903. No power, no light, no water, no cell phones. I mean, it's just like nothing was working. You didn't know how your loved ones were doing, except the ones that you had in your immediate vicinity. Hospitals are without power. Doctors were doing procedures with the flashlight from their cell phones. So it's like, you're on your own. What are you going to do now? Was really like a poster child of the relationship between, Puerto Rico and the United States. Were aimed at getting people to say, yes, it is possible to resist and break the colonized mentality that these guys can't be beat or that there's nothing we can do to change the situation, that sense of impotence.
In the 1970s, when Juan Segarra was in his early 20s, he chose to fight for the independence of his homeland. Although many Puerto Ricans were angered by a lack of political autonomy, only a small percentage advocated full independence from the United States. Even fewer chose Juan's path of paramilitary operations and robbing banks.
The last one I did was 33 years ago. Most of the times, my role was as the protection against the police coming. So I was ready to engage in gunfire if it had to be to protect my comrades from getting caught, so I had thought that through.
The island of Puerto Rico was first colonized by Spain in 1508. In 1898, it became a U.S. colony. Yet it has retained its own cultural identity. Today, nearly 3.5 million people live here, a population greater than 21 of the 50 U.S. states. But close to half live in poverty. Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, powerless to challenge actions of the United States government that affect its people. Residents have no vote in Congress or in presidential elections.
We had a subscription to Time magazine, and there was an issue in which the cover story was on prep schools in the U.S. And I read it, and Andover was covered prominently there, and it said they had 7 indoor basketball courts. So that made it for me. I said, wow. I had like a shark skin suit, which I thought was so cool. And the first time I walk into the dining hall, maybe half an hour after my parents left, and I felt homesickness. And as soon as I walk into the chow hall, taking maybe 10 steps, some guy goes, "Hey, you know, that's the first time I had heard that word, let alone addressed at me. But I went up and slapped him in the face, you know, as hard as I could, just a whack. And he was so shocked that he didn't do anything. And I went into the coat room to hang up my coat and then go into the dining room. And, you know, I said, holy, what have I gotten myself into at this place? Senior year at Andover, my professor for American history, Mr. Len James, he said, "Segarra, would you like to do a term paper in lieu of the final exam?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And he said, "Why don't you do a paper on the Spanish-American War?" And I did, and I came to Harvard to widen the library, to the bowels of the library, to read the congressional record. And there's nothing like reading these guys talk unfiltered. On the one side, there were those referring to us practically as monkeys, and like these brown races and this and that, how can we? And then you had guys like William Jennings Bryan and the anti-imperialists saying this betrays all of what the United States is about. You know, we fought the colonies, we fought for independence. What are we? We're going to become empire now.
For over 400 years, Puerto Rico suffered as a Spanish colony. But in 1897, Spain granted the island a degree of autonomy. Many hoped that this was a step towards independence, but it turned out to be a dead end. Just months after Puerto Rico's first election, the United States invaded the island. Within 10 weeks, hopes of independence were dashed as the island was annexed by the U.S. And then, in 1917, the Jones Act made Puerto Ricans U.S. citizens.
You know, so like, okay, we're going to make you American citizens, which you didn't ask for. Even if we were offered the citizenship of heaven, we would prefer our own. Okay. You guys in line for rubbing the statue, or?
Are you supposed to rub it?
I don't know if you were supposed to. I know I see a lot of people doing it, so.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. Okay, who's next? I do know that that's not John Harvard.
No.
No, because he was dead by the time they did that. So it was some young man posed for John Harvard.
Okay.
The year is not right, and he wasn't just the founder, because he was one of a whole group. So that's why they say this is the statue of the three lies.
Oh, okay. It's not the year. Nice.
That was my dorm room window on the top floor there. As I looked down that morning, it was just starting to be light. There was a mist still on the yard, which added to this kind of surreal quality. And there was a ring of policemen setting up an outer perimeter. I mean, they all had these helmets on with visors, and they set up a gauntlet on this door here.
The policemen are pushing spectators, bystanders.
And then you could hear the screaming and everything else, and then started seeing the guys, the students who were in the building being evicted one by one.
Anywhere in sight. The policemen are hitting them very hard. They're not just trying to push the people away. We know there's a fight on the other side.
They grab you by the hair and just pulled you down, and as they brought you down the stairs, they're kicking you and hitting you until you got to the paddy wagon, threw you in the paddy wagon, filled the paddy wagon, drove it out, and then brought the next one in.
Trampled. I see a policeman picking out someone who is apparently injured and stepped on.
That was what basically made the break for me from being an advocate of peaceful change and thinking that, you know, we could change things peacefully to understanding that these guys had to be fought in a different way. And for me, that was the beginning of my radicalization.
You see a policeman there beating up a student. The municipal policemen are being used to hold the crowd back. Dean Glimpse has told the people inside the building.
50 years earlier, another Puerto Rican student matriculates at Harvard, Pedro Albizu Campos. In 1921, he graduates from Harvard Law School with the highest grade point average in his class.
And, you know, one of the most privileged minds that Puerto Rico has produced, and was not recognized as such because, you know, he was black Puerto Rican, so not happening.
After Harvard, Albizu Campos returns to Puerto Rico, where he witnesses the U.S.-controlled sugar cartel extracting higher profits from plantation workers than any other place in the world. In 1934, Albizu Campos organizes sugarcane cutters, or macheteros, to strike against U.S. sugar companies. They are quickly met with a bloody crackdown. But the strikers prevail, and the wages are doubled to $1.50 a day. Emboldened, Albizu Campos forms the Cadets of the Republic, who take an oath to fight for Puerto Rican independence. On Palm Sunday, 1937, they plan a peaceful march. At the last minute, the colonial governor revokes their permit to assemble, and they are surrounded by 200 police, some armed with Thompson machine guns. Unprovoked, the police begin firing. Marchers and bystanders attempt to flee. A flag bearer is the first to be killed. A 7-year-old girl picks up the flag, and she is immediately shot. A wounded cadet drags himself to the wall and writes in his own blood, "Viva la República! Abajo los asesinos! Long live the Republic! Down with the murderers!" 235 were wounded, 19 killed, including the 7-year-old girl. $20,000 mourners attend the funeral ceremonies. None of the police are held accountable.
I didn't know any of that when I was growing up. But, you know, I was like this. What did I know? It wasn't until years later that I began to have a different historical perspective on Puerto Rico. And, you know, the gag law that made flying the Puerto Rican flag by itself illegal and punishable by prison. You know, you couldn't speak in favor of independence or you'd be thrown into prison.
In 1948, Law 53, Ley de la Mordaza, known as the gag order, makes it a crime to display a Puerto Rican flag. Speaking out for independence or singing a patriotic Puerto Rican song can lead to 10 years in prison. In 1950, nationalists across the island rebelled, staging coordinated attacks on police stations, the governor's mansion, and the U.S. federal courthouse. The National Guard responds with heavy artillery, mortars, grenades, and P-47 bombers. This is the first time that U.S. fighter planes attack on U.S. soil. In the aftermath, 2,000 Puerto Ricans are rounded up and arrested. In retaliation, two nationalists form a plan.
Outside Blair House, the president's temporary Washington home, extreme fanatics of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party try to force their way in, guns blazing, to assassinate the President of the United States. Assassin Oscar Collazo and two other guards are wounded as the plot is foiled. At Washington's emergency hospital, a 24-hour guard watches over Collazo, who, despite a chest wound, recovers to face trial for murder.
They had tried to kill me, and I knew that they'd try it again. I knew who they were. They were a bunch of fanatics that wanted an independent Puerto Rico.
Actually, one of the common views is that the nationalists rose up like a bunch of and the government squashed them. In fact, it was the U.S. government policy, the governor's policy, to push these guys into a corner and get them to a point where it's either give up or go down fighting. And so they were pushed into that situation, and then, of course, they responded and fought, crushed in a way that is like, you know, like when they put, when the invaders, you know, put down all the freedom fighters, cut their heads off and put them on a pike so everybody else knows that don't mess with us because this is what's waiting for you. I was approached by somebody I trusted very much, and he said, listen, there's the underground movement is being organized in Puerto Rico for independence, and you know, we think you're a good candidate. What do you say? I said, yes.
In 1954, 4 Puerto Ricans living in New York decide that they are willing to sacrifice their lives for independence. Communicating from prison, Albizu Campos presents them with a mission: to bring the fight for independence to the American public. The group purchases new Sunday dress clothes and buys one-way tickets to Washington, D.C. Then, they enter the U.S. Capitol building while Congress is in session. Lolita Lebron leads them in reciting the Lord's Prayer. Then, she stands up and shouts from the gallery, "Viva Puerto Rico Libre! Long live free Puerto Rico!"
Gunfire in the House of Representatives sends police and crowds rushing to the Capitol. Disheveled and wild-eyed, a Puerto Rican fanatic, Rafael Miranda, is photographed moments after he and a fellow terrorist, Andres Cordero, had joined with Lolito Lebron in pouring more than 20 shots at the crowded House floor. 5 congressmen are wounded in the murderous attack. Still grimly defiant, the woman is hustled from the angry, menacing crowd.
I am a Puerto Rican woman that claims for freedom for my country. And I would like this that happened today awake the conscience of the men of goodwill of the world and of the government of the United States to free Puerto Rico immediately. I didn't come to kill here nobody.
What did you come here for?
To ask for freedom in some way, because all other ways have been tried, and the country of Puerto Rico still is not a free country. It's the only country in the New World still is segregated.
Didn't you think that you hurt somebody if you fired into the...
Sir, I came here just to give a brief statement, not to answer all your questions. I'm sorry.
For most Americans, there's no context to that. It's like these guys are totally insane. You know, these fanatics for Puerto Rico independence. Well, you know, when we've done such good for them, how could they do that?
The criminal investigation reveals that Lolita Lebron fired her weapon into the ceiling, harming no one. Capitol Police find a note in her handbag. My life I give for the freedom of my country. The United States is betraying the sacred principles of mankind with the continuous subjugation of my country. Filiberto Ojeda Rios was born in Puerto Rico in the 1930s. As a child, he saw his grandparents lose their land to the North American sugar monopolies. He witnessed the slaughter of the Ponce Massacre. He saw the death of colonialism globally, but experienced it, lingering on tenaciously at home. In his 20s, already an accomplished jazz musician, he gave up his career as a trumpet player and began to fight for independence. It was clear to Filiberto Ojeda that the U.S. was not going to change of its own accord.
Si uno cree en la libertad, si uno sabe que su pueblo está siendo oprimido, si uno tiene totalmente el convencimiento de que estamos viviendo en un país colonizado, de que fuimos invadidos, de que nos mataron, de que están destruyendo nuestro pueblo, que se aplique el genocidio de día a día, destruir al enemigo es salvar la patria.
In the fall of 1969, dozens of bombs began exploding in Puerto Rico. And U.S.-based hotels, casinos, and department stores like Sheraton, Howard Johnson's, and Woolworth were all hit. There were few injuries, but hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage. Filiberto Ojeda called these actions armed propaganda.